Welcome to the Introduction to Tax Resolution. This is a two-part course. So this first part, we're going to be covering your authority and understanding some basics of tax resolution. In this course, we're going to be covering some definitions, some background of tax resolution, and certainly understanding the players. Who are the representatives on the our side of the fence? Who are the IRS representatives? Understanding the players at work and understanding, most importantly, your authority. What are those authorizations? How do we get authority? And how do we work with IRS within that authority? And how we work with confidential taxpayer information. So that's going to be everything we cover in the next hour. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in. A little bit of the definition and background. We have to understand, as we look at the IRS, there's all these buzzwords we're hearing lately. We hear words like tax resolution or tax relief. What about tax controversy? These are all terms that are related to this field of tax resolution. Some definitions that I found out there deal with in implementing a solution to solve a taxpayer's IRS problem, but I'm thinking, well, what about the state? We can't forget that. It is that I've seen definitions talking about resolving someone's tax debt, but what if there isn't tax debt? What if somebody's, a non-filer or they're in exam or in audit right now? It's not really a debt yet. So bottom line, if a taxpayer owes IRS or the state money and a tax resolution firm specializes in representing them, it is, doing it in the best way, in the best interest of the taxpayer. So my definition that I came up with in this sense is it's the process of representing a taxpayer's interest in front of the IRS or the state, we can't forget about the state, and then developing and implementing a plan to resolve their issue with those authorities. The issue can be much bigger. The world of tax resolution is much bigger than just a taxpayer who owes money. So as we dive into this, that's just kind of giving you a little bit of a surface area of really what is this big world of tax resolution, but it's helping a taxpayer resolve an issue they have with the IRS or state, developing that plan and helping them implement the plan. If we look at some of the background and the landscape of where we're at right now, if we say, okay, we have this thing called an IRS data book, it gives us some awesome statistics, and let's just look at our most recent fiscal year in 2017. Well, the IRS collected a pretty massive amount of money, $3.4 trillion, more than that. That's pretty impressive. They processed more than 255 million returns and issued almost $437 billion of refunds. They assisted so many people, more than 55 million taxpayers on the phone or in person, and they continued even more efforts against ID fraud. So, with all those statistics, they sound great, right? I mean, why do the IRS even need representatives like us? Because they have everything under control, right? Well, not exactly. They may sound great on the surface, but the reality of it is the IRS budgets are down severely. If we look right now, there's less money for employees, and there's unfortunately attrition, meaning these good personnel that's been with them for a while, some of them are retiring and they're not really able to replace them. So the new ones are maybe less equipped to perform the jobs. They don't maybe always understand and respect taxpayer rights. And think about what's happening to the customer service at the IRS and how that's being harmed by budget cuts. And look at how many calls are being unanswered. And just looking at the volume of the service centers, I don't know if you've been impacted locally here where I'm at. We had a local service center that closed, and now we have to go across the state to a service center. And correspondence, like when we're writing letters and information to the IRS, they are so overwhelmed they can't really handle those timely. So this is really what we're at right now. What does this landscape look like? As we look at kind of the future of this, taxpayers have increased. The population is increasing dramatically. And think about this too, as we have foreign taxpayers in the mix as well. Because they expanded the rules and they're now dealing with foreign taxpayers, the population base they have to serve has increased dramatically. So if we look at just by sheer volume, that's going to hurt customer service. It would in any business if the volume of people you're supposed to handle increases dramatically and your agent number or employee number goes down. Not only that, but think about the complexity. What's happened in the recent few decades of our tax system? It's getting so much more complex, and the duties assigned to current staff is becoming more complex as well. They have to do more than they used to. Think about just right now what's happened to us on just recent history, the past few months. new tax reform. They have to deal with that and figure out how to come up with the regulations and the forms and how to hand down all that training. They have to deal with new technology and definitely security needs as our world of information is just rapidly changing. They have to worry about tax ID theft issues. And here's kind of a sobering thing that I found as well. Here we have all this information that they have to deal with. How are they training their staff? Here's what's really happening. If you look since 2010 and just pull, there's a lot of statistics out there, the data book and so forth. Maybe not your angle, but for me, I'm kind of interested in a lot of these things. I must be a data analyst at heart. But I looked and saw that their training budgets, 76.5% cut in their training budget since 2010. Like, oh my gosh, here they have so much more information that they have to deal with, and they cut their budget by that much for training because they had to. What's really going to happen? In fact, the Taxpayer Advocate Office, you'll see throughout my courses too, I put a lot of abbreviations in there just to make sure that you kind of see and speak the same language as them. So even though I say this is an overview course or it's an introduction course, by the time you end this, you're going to know so much more than where you started. The Taxpayer Advocate Office report, which they produce every few years, they looked and said, okay, what are the top issues we think right now that is facing the IRS? And they say, well, they don't really have a very modernized telephone service that is cutting into proper service of the taxpayer. That definitely employee training, just like when I found that statistic, and it's just so glaringly obvious. They've cut training budgets that much. The employees are just simply not going to be trained like they need to be. If they look at the budget cuts to the taxpayer assistance centers, so like my budget cut to my local one, it pretty much eliminated the taxpayer assistance center, or we'll see that most of them are closed almost all year except for just a few months of tax season. So that is definitely impairing the ability for taxpayers to receive quality service, whether they want that help, in person, if they want some help over the telephone, and definitely if they want help from a competent and trained staff. So these are all things that the National Taxpayer Advocate Office is saying, guys, these are some real issues going on here. So it may, like at the first slide, sound really great and rosy. Why do they need us? Why is there even room for us as representatives? But when you look at the stark reality, they desperately need us. If we look at it at this point, the taxpayer representatives, it's even more important now than I would say it ever has been in a lot of the past history, because in light of all this, it is so much more important now to help defend taxpayer rights. That is our job. We're on the front lines of helping to defend our taxpayer rights. And believe it or not, because there's so much of a difficulty in training now, sometimes we're in the position to help train IRS personnel in appropriate procedures they should be taking in the cases we're working. I cannot even tell you how many different IRS personnel now that I'm going, I try to do it in a nice way. I'm kind of a nice bulldog, I guess. I'll say, not to tread on your toes, but I think in the Internal Revenue Manual, it says I can do this in this circumstance and refer to it, and they'll put you on hold and look it up and go, yeah, actually, you're right. And I've found myself in that position so many different times. We have to be ready and willing to do that because our first, most important job is to defend our taxpayers' rights. We also are in the position to help bring successful resolution to cases. That helps immensely. It helps the taxpayer, but also think of this, it helps reduce that caseload burden on the IRS. We serve an incredibly valuable position as a taxpayer representative. We are helping the government, we're helping the taxpayer, we're helping to defend taxpayer rights, we're bringing all this together. And how do we do that? It is, bottom line, knowledge is power in this case. It is the power to help the taxpayer because we have knowledge to defend their rights. We can help to say, whoa, wait a second, you can't do this. Here's what you can do. Having that knowledge is everything. It gives us power to help the IRS, as crazy as that may sound. We can help reduce the caseload burden because we're like, hey, this is what you need from the taxpayer, XYZ, get it done, move on. We're done. We can close the case. But that still does come to a cost as the representative. You're here because you're very interested in learning about what representation is and, tax resolution, that world of it. But you have an investment right now of time. You may have an investment of money. It should be very lucrative. That is the goal. And for that very valuable piece that we offer into this, it should definitely be lucrative. So I just want to have you think for just a moment, what are these potential lucrative areas of practice? We have a little bit of an idea, why is it important? Why are representatives so crucial and important right now in the landscape of working with the IRS or even the state, quite honestly? Well, what can we do? And I've actually just alphabetized these because there's so many different areas. And if you are fascinated with one of these, you can have a specialty area, of course. But just think of all these different arenas. You could appeal IRS actions. You can do audit representation. That's a whole arena, like just helping to work with the exam department. Audit representation is a lucrative area of representation. You might be able to help with bankruptcy. Not, maybe you're not an attorney and you can't, submit a bankruptcy petition, but helping just to perform the tax part of it. Some tax is dischargeable in bankruptcy. What kind of a valuable asset could you be to those bankruptcy attorneys if you're like, hey, I can get you the information you need to help to determine if it is dischargeable. You can help a taxpayer who owes by setting up something called currently non-collectible. You'll see it abbreviated as CNC. Working with employment tax cases. Employment tax cases, that's incredibly lucrative right now. The IRS is really heavily going after employers that are bad players, or maybe ones that are unintentionally bad players. What about installment agreements or partial pay installment agreements? A partial pay installment agreement is one of my new favorite things because of what it allows us to do for the taxpayer, and it brings these cases to a great resolution. What about innocent spouse release? And there's even something called injured spouse too, but innocent spouse relief, helping that one that maybe was wronged by a spouse and now they're stuck with a tax bill. Liens or levy release, that's a definite area of practice that we can assist a taxpayer if they have a lien or definitely a levy where they're taking something from that taxpayer. Helping with offers and compromise. We hear a lot in the radio and the TV and the news media outlets about these companies that do these things, but this is that, yes, it's lucrative, but think of what you're doing to help the taxpayers. That's one of the takeaways I want you to have in this. We can help with penalties. Maybe that taxpayer has an ability to have some of those abated. What kind of a relief that could provide to them? Looking at the statute of limitations, reviewing that and saying, well, wait a second, maybe they're not even legally allowed to collect this debt anymore. Are we reviewing that? So there's so many different lucrative areas of practice. I want to just give you a little flavor of that and all these little tidbits of things that we can do. I want to let you know that every one of these I do cover a lot more in detail in a whole separate course called the Introduction to Collections. So we're not going to really dive into these right now, but just keep that in mind that these are potential great lucrative areas of practice that we can help a taxpayer with, and it should be lucrative for us, quite honestly.